Welcome back to another innovation review. Today we are going to be talking about the Ranger from Cyrusher. And before we jump into the review, I just want to ask you guys to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, really helps grow the channel. And with that out of the way, let's jump into the review. First, let's talk about the looks. The Ranger is Cyrusher's latest full suspension off-road ready e-bike. Now, I don't say this about many bikes, if any bikes at all, but the Ranger is probably the most comfortable e-bike I've ever ridden. Are there some things I would change about it? Sure, but honestly it was so much fun to ride. The fat tires and full suspension combo makes the off-road feel like on-road, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the suspension. The Ranger comes in 3 colors, green, white, and black. Now the chainstay portions of all of their bikes are different colors, which I think is pretty cool. I really dig the white and orange combo they have. It doesn't come with fenders or a rack, so commuting is sort of out of the question, but cruising? Oh yeah, we can do some cruising. Cyrusher offers free shipping and a 2-year warranty on their e-bikes, which is about double what some e-bike brands are currently offering. Next, let's talk about the motor. The motor we have here is a 750 watt Bafang motor. Now, this is usually the part where I say all the motors are the same, etc., but the Ranger also has a torque sensor, which is a step up from any of the Cyrusher e-bikes we've tested in the past. This gives you much more input feedback while riding and just connects you to the ride a bit more than a regular old cadence sensing e-bike. Similarly to the Ovia, we also have a 25 amp controller, so we're able to pull more current and elicit that much more power from the motor. The Ranger is configured as a true class 3 e-bike, so the throttle is only going to take you to 20 miles per hour and the pedal assist can take you to the full 28 miles per hour. Next, let's talk about the battery. The battery we have here is a 52 volt, 20 amp hour, 1040 watt hour battery. It's lockable and removable, and Cyrusher left us plenty of room to get this down to battery in and out. With 1040 watt hours, we should be able to get anywhere between 35 to 55 miles on a full charge. The battery takes about 6 hours, maybe 7 hours for a full charge, and Cyrusher's also upgraded their chargers. Now they provide 3 amp chargers with their Ranger and Ovia models. Next, let's talk about the brakes. The Ranger is rocking Logan hydraulic brakes with 180mm rotors on the front and rear wheels. Stopping this thing is actually fun in and of itself. You know, I'm a big fan of skidding to a stop, especially in some dewy grass. I mean, come on, who doesn't love that? And these brakes allow me to do that to the max. You know, having these hydraulic brakes on this bike was definitely the right call, and I think they're pretty awesome. Next, let's talk about the gears. Up in the front, we have got our 9-speed Shimano trigger shifter, and that's connected to our Shimano Altus derailleur in the rear. I think the gearing ratio here was pretty spot on, and I felt like I could give the right amount of effort at any speed. Next, let's talk about the extras. With Cyrusher, you expect a certain amount of extras, and with the Ranger, they left out a few things that we're used to seeing. There are no fenders, which can be purchased separately. There's no rear rack or integrated rear light, and so in that sense, it does feel like it's missing a few things. However, some people like the fenderless look, and most people wouldn't utilize the Ranger as a commuter anyway, so these are probably features that don't really matter in the long run. The overall impression here is that this e-bike was designed to ride anywhere, and so some of the more urban-centric features just weren't needed. Next, let's talk about the suspension. Up in the front, we have got an adjustable double crown suspension fork. Now this front fork is very smooth. I love the fact that we have preload and lockout adjustments here, and I feel like we could do some pretty wild things on this bike. The front fork is air suspension, right, which is a huge step up from spring forks, and then in the rear, we've got a semi-hidden rear air shock. This rear shock is an upgrade over the Ovia because we do have some adjustments available to us here on the rear shock. And this full suspension setup paired with these fat tires makes this a very smooth ride. The tires we have are 26 by 4 inch Kinda tires, and we don't get any sidewall reflective stripes or puncture protection, but they are pretty darn comfortable, and I found myself being able to trust them even on uneven or loose terrain. One thing I did find interesting about the Ranger and the Ovia is the way that the front wheel is mounted to the fork. Instead of being a bolt through or quick release, it utilizes 2 smaller bolts that screw into the quick release axle, and I hadn't seen that before, but so far it seems to be working out just fine. Finally, let's talk about who this bike might be for. So this bike is for someone who wants to be very comfortable while riding around on sidewalks, bike paths, and light trails, and then wants the option to tackle tougher trails if that's required. During the ride test, I would go back and forth between the concrete pathways and off-road, and honestly, it was hard to really tell a difference. It was, pretty wild and honestly very impressive. Without the fenders and rear rack, we wouldn't really consider this an option for commuting, but this would be a perfect vehicle for riding around town, traversing some off-road trails, and just having fun. So we've talked about the specs, we've talked about some of the use cases, and now it's time to head outside for the ride test. Alright guys, we are outside for the ride test on the Cyrusher Ranger, and I wanted to start off the bike because I want you to see something magical that happens when I get on this bike. So we're going to pop on this bike, and see where everything's at, and then as we sit down, we just settle into this super spongy ride, and in a good way, not spongy in a bad way. It's just I've got this thing set up to be very cush. Yes, I understand you're pausing, thank you. And it feels really, really smooth. It's actually very, very comfortable to ride this bike. So let's go ahead and turn it on. Similar to the Ovia, we're gonna turn it on this side. We got it turned on over there, boom. We've got our light button, on and off, horn. There you go. And then we've got this, we can cycle through some of the things we like to see here. And then we can turn the lights on and off from this side. And that doesn't actually control the lights, but what it is gonna do, it doesn't actually control the lights. What it does is, if you're riding at night, one of the things, when we do get this extra button, so we turn the lights on, the light is on, but the screen doesn't dim. And so if you've ever been riding around at night, you want that screen to be a little bit dimmer, so you can just touch it on this side, and it's not actually affecting the lights, but it is gonna dim the screen as if it was controlling the lights, which it isn't. So a couple things to note there. So if you get out there, you're like, man, my display's so dark, it's probably just because you got the lights turned on via this keypad. So let's go ahead. We've got it in pedal assist level 0, and hit the throttle, nothing happens. So let's go ahead and put in pedal assist level 1, pull back on this twist throttle, and see where we go. We're resuming, guys, in case you didn't know. Now, it's interesting, the difference between the Ranger and the Ovia as far as the functionality goes, this is going to be controlled by the level of pedal assist you're at. So I'm in pedal assist level 1, rolling at 67 miles per hour, whereas on the Ovia, we can still go 20 miles per hour all the time, and so we have access to like the full power of the throttle. On this one, we don't. Now, I'm one of those guys who I would prefer to have access to the full power of the throttle, but from a safety perspective, again, if you have somebody who's getting on for the first time, you're letting somebody try your bike, and that way they control it a little bit more. And again, this is a legit class 3 e-bike, so we're not gonna go over that 20 miles per hour with the throttle. So if you are in a spot with some strict legislation, they really, really nail down on that sort of stuff, this is gonna pass all those tests for you. And then once we start pedaling, then the motor really kicks in and starts taking us to our higher miles per hour here. Go ahead and pop on the brakes here. Nice, easy stop. And we'll head down this way. 8. Now we shifted up into 9th on this side, and we're just cruising. Now what's interesting is, it says we're only going 25 miles per hour, but it feels a lot faster than that. I mean, I almost couldn't even tell the difference between being on the path and then being on this ground. It is super bumpy. Just this full suspension setup is pretty nice. We'll go ahead and hit this bump here. Yeah, as far as the suspension goes and the ride feel goes, I think this is honestly one of the most comfortable e-bike rides that I have ridden on. Huge fat tires, full suspension, air on the front, air in the rear. It's just, yeah, it's kind of magical. Go ahead and do another brake test here. As you see, we can lock those brakes out pretty easily. Let's go ahead and downshift here. And let's go, we'll get into some trouble on this one. I imagine it's going to be a little bit of a different feel than the Ovia was. Oh yeah, come on. Oh yeah. Now the other difference between the Ranger and the Ovia, I mean there's a few of them, but one is the handling. So you've got a lot more nimble of a feel on the Ranger. So when we were on the Ovia, we were kind of having to turn on all these places, do a little bit more leaning, whereas with the Ranger we can kind of just go whoop whoop whoop, you know, through the little spots, and then it does feel like it has a little bit more kick off the line than the Ovia as well. And we're just cruising at this point. Now we had mentioned the motor noise on the Ovia, and the Ranger does not seem to have that same noise. Again, I don't know if it's the tires sort of creating more tire noise, and that's sort of like drowning out the motor a little bit, but I just don't get the same thing. Now what else is interesting is this isn't just a cadence pedal assist. So you'll notice like I'm pedaling and we're in first gear and we're only getting 15, 16 miles per hour. Even if I'm pedaling, you know, really fast, it'll go a little bit faster. But if we want to really hit those top speeds, we've got a torque sensor here. And so the torque sensor, as we, you know, shift down and we start adding some torque into it, you really can tell the difference between the torque and just the regular cadence pedal assist. So as we go up here, we're putting in more torque, and as we press a little bit harder, you can feel those extra, you know, bursts of energy coming in. So it does make you feel a little bit more connected to the power output. If, you know, I want to like pedal kind of slower, then the bike will slow down a little bit. Got a flower in my mouth. But as soon as we sort of hammer on it, it's a really almost instantaneous burst of power that we get, hitting that bump like nothing. I'm doing this again because that was just fun. Literally, I'm just cruising over this ground. It is uneven. It's full of potholes. But there's almost no difference between riding on the pavement and riding over there. That is pretty cool. So all in all, I mean, as far as the ride feel go, like I said, the Ranger is one of the smoothest setups for an e-bike that I've personally ridden on. It is pretty darn smooth. Let's go ahead and drop a curb here real quick. Drop a curb. Woo! Go ahead and get some air here real quick. A little. Woo! Hello. Hey, my eyes are up here. Yeah, that was no problem for this thing. Being able to, you know what, let's also pop in here. See if we can't do a little hill climbing. It's the wrong gear for hill climbing here, but again, just going on these off-road trails, it's just so smooth here. Just in, out. Yeah, the
The feel of the ride here is just, I can't overstate how smooth it is. And back on the trail, but I really can't tell a difference. That is pretty wild. So in conclusion, the Ranger is something that you almost want to ride it off the path. It's just way more fun of an experience. Is it as smooth as riding on the trail? Pretty darn. It is pretty darn the same riding experience. Like when I'm riding on the road like this, it's like, okay, I'm just drifting on a cloud. But when I go off road, it still feels just as smooth with the suspension. Yeah, gotta love it.
And that is going to do it for our review of the Ranger from Cyrusher. If you guys want to know more about them, I'll have a link to Cyrusher's website down below. And if you guys have any questions for me, please let me know down in the comments. I love talking to you guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.